I make paintings where I explore notions of the city or autobiographical in the sense of experiences I've had living and working in the city. So I combine my interest in paintings, drawings, graphic work and big influence on literature, particularly poetry. My name's Pete Clarke. I'm an artist working in Liverpool. This is my studio at the Blue Coat. Originally I come from East Lancashire. I was born in Burnley but was brought up in Nelson. And I think the only thing I was particularly good at was football and art. Because I was quite young when I went to art school. Most of the students had done sixth forms and foundations, so they were all 2 or 3. So I was like this little boy. In fact, funny enough, when I went to Bristol at my interview, I was dressed as a sort of Paul Weller lookalike, Northern Soul, and I had this mohair suit on, very short hair. I probably looked about 12. And one of the lecturers, an American, opened my portfolio and looked at me and said, "What's a little boy like you doing applying to a big college like this?" Well, a friend of mine described my paintings as a mixture of British Impressionism and Russian Constructivism, which is not a bad description. And I think coming from my background, some of my earlier paintings, particularly in Liverpool, were much more obviously political with a big P. And of course, when I was in Sheffield working on the Kelvin, there were a lot of social questions around housing and unemployment. It was the traditional steel industry has been well in decline. I had a show here at the Blue Coat and then a show in Rochdale, and Julian Spalding, who was then one of the main heads of art curators in Sheffield, bought a painting for the museum. And then they advertised for Residency, and so I applied for the Residency and fortunately was offered the job of living on the estate. And in a funny sort of way, even though I think the Residency projects were a bit politically controversial in the sense that some politicians inevitably said, why waste money on artists when we desperately need money for education? I think it's a big problem in Britain that a lot of politicians haven't got the argument for the role of culture as opposed to social services. But in a curious way, because I was the artist on the Kelvin estate, it gave a focus then for some of the groups I was working with, and some of the groups then got more money. And I know the Kelvin Nursery got more money from the local authority. So in a sense, it was useful being there in that sense. You could sort of, not that it was me personally, but the nature of it, there was a chemistry that then people realised what was going on in the estate. I mean, it's a great privilege, to be funded, to be able to spend 6 months just making your own paintings. I mean, quite often if you have a job, you've got the money, but you have no time, or you have time, but you can't afford, simple things like renting studios. I do a lot of drawing. And I use photographs. I've always done a lot of printmaking. I tend to work in series, so quite often I would have an idea for maybe a set of work. A friend of mine that I worked with had an exhibition in Berlin a few months ago, and then we went to a place called Stechlin. It was the communist East Germany's sort of Lake District. We did a lot of drawings, and there's a lot of hunting towers in all these forests, so I did a lot of drawings which then became the paintings. I don't do sort of photorealist type paintings, or even the ones on the Kelvin were a mixture of photographs, drawings, because they were very much about the place. So I could make lots of drawings of people who lived on the estate at the time, and photographs and things. I have lots of notebooks and drawing books and collage books. I keep a lot of source material, a lot of research material. This was the old post office building. But visually I think they and of course being a sort of a closet romantic, the sort of ruin on the hill, the sort of Turner reference is obviously quite important. Also, I'm very interested in literature, so a lot of the text comes from either poets or a lot of it are relatively autobiographical in the sense they are very much my immediate experience. And of course, cities and architecture are very important images and source material. A lot of paintings relatively recently come from an article Frank Brangwyn's etchings. There's a whole series. I've got this amazing book of his graphic works, and they're all images of architecture, scaffolding and rebuilding the sort of London end of the 19th, early 20th century, and they've been very influential. I was very influenced by the sort of Brecht theatre, where he tries to unpick a realistic picture by strange incidents. It's almost like a collage sensibility. And the other thing I was always quite interested in is how we look at paintings. So I'm interested in the look of the poem, the words on the page. Because that's always been interest anyway, whether we read paintings or whether we look at paintings. You know, so having text always makes sense. I mean, a lot of people find it very irritating that I paint words on pictures because it destroys the sort of naturalistic look of the image. But then, of course, that's the logic of doing it. So by having different levels and layers and different information that sort of are bleeding through, rather than passively consume an image, you'd have to engage with it by going closer to read some of the information. So there is a collage sensibility, even in the paintings where, you know, even now when they're not collage, but there is that notion of putting things together.